Who is piloting the UAPs or UFOs constantly seen in our skies? Where are they from? Why are they here? How long have they been here? What is their mission on planet Earth? Do they come in peace, or do they have more sinister motives? Join Mad Mark as he uncovers the answers to these questions and many more of the mysteries that puzzle us all on Who Are the Aliens? The history of the Anunnaki on planet Earth. And now, here's Mad Mark. Today's episode, Rebuilding After the Deluge or Great Flood, whichever way you prefer to refer to it. Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 9 of Who Are the Aliens? The History of the Anunnaki on Planet Earth. I, of course, am Mad Mark, and before I begin, just a quick reminder to please like, share, and comment. It helps so much. I would also like to mention that I have created a new Facebook page specifically for this show. I put a link down in the show description, so go ahead and follow me over there. I am hoping that this will become a place where we can all gather to discuss each episode and where you can voice your comments and questions, so please check that out. Today we will conclude our studies of Zecharia Sitchin's first book, The 12th Planet, published by Stein and Day in 1976. But before I get into all that, I just want to take a moment to clarify something about this show. A few episodes back, I had a viewer comment that they were afraid that the Anunnaki were trying to steal our souls. Now, I'm not sure where that came from, since I have never covered anything like that on this program. But let me just say this. There are a lot of people online posting shows about the Anunnaki, especially on YouTube. Now, I have personally watched several of these, so I know what I'm talking about. I'm not pointing any fingers here, but many of these programs are over-sensationalizing this topic to the point where it becomes completely ridiculous. I've seen and heard everything from the Anunnaki were reptilians to Anunnaki is a broad term that means anyone who came down to Earth from the heavens, and that there were many different planets and beings involved. Okay, well, you see where I'm going with this. In my opinion, they are taking this true story of what really happened and twisting it into complete fantasy. This is not Star Wars, people. Why do they do this? Well, I'm assuming that they do it in order to attract more viewers, and viewers are important. But you know what's even more important? The truth. I told you all way back on episode 1 that I am a truth seeker, and I have spent the last 40 years of my life searching for that truth. And during that time, I have read, listened to, and watched many different viewpoints on this topic. And out of all of them, the only source that ever rang true to me, the only source that ever presented itself to me as being completely logical, were the books of Zecharia Sitchin. Why, you may ask? Because they are the translations straight from the ancient Sumerian texts, the oldest written texts on planet Earth. It's not information that was channeled by an alien or conjured up in a seance or any other unreliable sources. I am only interested in the facts, and obviously you are too, or you wouldn't be here. The ancient Sumerians wrote about these events because they were important to them. And with this show, I am attempting to bring this truth to all of you as both a teacher and as a student, straight from Mr. Sitchin's work. And while I will often give my opinions on various topics or events, after all, this is my show, and as the host, that is another part of my job. But I will never sensationalize anything or turn this topic into a script from a sci-fi movie just to attract more viewers. If it's not the truth as written in the texts, then I won't be reporting on it. And if you don't believe what you hear on my programs, you always have the option of reading these translated texts for yourself. There are many websites online that provide these translations. However, the Anunnaki are not the only things that the ancient Sumerians wrote about. You'll find everything there from agricultural information to government information, recipes, and just about everything else that was a part of the lives of these ancient people. So be prepared for a long read. I personally have chosen to let Mr. Sitchin sift through all of that for me. And with no further ado, let's continue with our studies. When we left off on episode 8, we were discussing the recovery period for both the Anunnaki and the humans after the Great Flood. Everything had been destroyed, and it was imperative that some semblance of normalcy be restored as quickly as possible. And obviously, it was going to take quite some time before the waters receded completely, and neither the Anunnaki nor the humans had time to wait. Nope, if planting crops was going to be accomplished, it would have to be done in the mountains and the hills. Scholars agree that those are the areas in the Near East where agriculture first began. Obviously, the fertile and easily cultivated plains and valleys would have been easier, but they were still underwater. Indeed, it would be millennia before these were dry enough to be habitable and permit farming. Oddly enough, it was Enlil who first instructed the humans in agriculture. The texts tell us that he barred the mountains as with a door to keep the floodwaters away. And later, two of Enlil's assistants, Ninazu and Nidmata, taught the cultivation of cereals, so that eventually Sumer, the land that knew not grain, came to know grain. Scholars agree that agriculture began with the cultivation of wild emmer as a source of wheat and barley, but they are unable to explain how these grains became so highly specialized so quickly. Thousands of generations of genetic selection are normally needed to acquire even a modest degree of sophistication. Yet, the period, time, or location where this all might have taken place on Earth is nowhere to be found. And spelt, which is a hard-grained form of wheat, is an even greater mystery, because it is the result of mixing genes from several plants. And what of domesticating animals almost overnight? How were the humans able to accomplish that so quickly? Modern scholars have no answers to how this mountainous semicircle in the ancient Near East suddenly became a continuous source of new varieties of cereals, plants, trees, fruits, vegetables, and domesticated animals. But the ancient Sumerians knew the answer. According to the texts, the seeds were a gift given to them by Anu, sent down from the 12th planet, and Enlil and Enki were responsible for the gifts of agriculture and the domestication of animals. As the years went by, following the Great Flood, the human population grew and grew, and it was at that point that the Anunnaki came to the decision that intermediaries would be needed between themselves and the growing populace. They were to be known as the gods, or the lofty ones, and kingship was introduced on Earth. Human rulers were given the job of assuring mankind's continued service to these gods, as well as channeling the teachings and laws of the gods down to the people. Are we positive that this is still not going on to this day? If I were a betting man, I'm just saying that I don't think this has ever stopped. Just keep that thought in mind as we continue. Let's return to the text and we'll come back to that. Both the Sumerian and Akkadian texts state that the Anunnaki retained the lordship over the lands, each to his own. But the first tasks mankind was set to work on was the rebuilding of the pre-diluvial cities exactly where they had originally been located. The first of these was Eridu, and following that, the first royal city, Kish, was restored. The texts tell us that, "May the city be the nest, the place where mankind shall repose." The texts go on to say that the kingship was lowered from heaven. The kingship was in Kish. The Bible tells us that Nimrod, the patriarch of the kingdoms of Uruk, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria descended from Kish. It records the spread of mankind, its lands and kingships, as an outgrowth of the division of mankind into three branches following the Great Flood, and descended from and named after the three sons of Noah. And each of these three was assigned to one of the leading deities. The first of these was, of course, Sumer, but the other two were no less important. In 3200 BC, about 500 years after Sumeria, kingship, statehood, and civilization first appeared in the Nile Valley. This, of course, led to the great civilization of Kemet/Egypt, and about 500 years after that, the third civilization in the Indus Valley was established. Ancient texts and archaeological evidence all attest to the fact that these three regions were heavily connected both culturally and economically. And speaking of Kemet, Egypt, one of the most popular and enigmatic monuments in the world, the pyramids, were designed and constructed by a pair of Anunnaki, Enki and his son Ningishita, aka Tahuti, aka Thoth to the Egyptians, and aka also Quetzalcoatl to the Aztecs. I'll dive into all of that further on later episodes. But the ancient Egyptian name for their land was the Raised Land, and their earliest writings state that a very great God came forth in the earliest of times. He found the land lying under water and mud, and he literally raised it up from under the waters. This, of course, was Enki, the chief engineer of the Anunnaki. And another interesting fact about these three regions, these earliest of civilizations on Earth, Sumeria, Egypt, Kemet, and the Indus Valley, is that they were all connected through language. But how is that possible when each of them spoke a different language than the others? Well, the scientific answer is that they were not different. This was discovered in 1852 when the Reverend Charles Foster demonstrated that these early languages all stemmed from the same primeval source, that being Sumerian. More recently, scholars have shown that the very first Egyptian writings stemmed from a prior written language, and the only prior language to Egyptian was Sumerian. But how did this happen? How could it be that the three earliest civilizations on Earth, which were all connected both culturally and economically, as I stated earlier, could possibly have spoken slightly different versions of the original Sumerian? Such a mutation in language could have occurred simply by time and distance, I suppose, but the Sumerian texts tell a different story. It occurred via a direct decision of the gods, and it's a decision that we have already discussed several episodes ago. Does the Tower of Babel incident ring a bell? We were told that prior to that, the entire Earth, such as it was at that time, was of one language and using the same words. And so, there you have the answer to that puzzle, the Tower of Babel. But these two newer regions of people, these two new civilizations in the Indus Valley and Kemet, Egypt, were not created by chance. Indeed, they were planned and executed by the Anunnaki purposefully. As the human population continued to grow, and much faster than the Anunnaki numbers on Earth, the gods became fearful. Remember a few episodes back when I discussed the obvious fear displayed by Enlil regarding the growing number of humans on Earth? Well, evidently, his fears spread equally as fast as the humans were spreading. Eventually, more and more Anunnaki climbed aboard that same bandwagon. And their solution to this growing problem? Divide and conquer. However, since they needed the humans to continue to do their work, it was actually more of a divide and rule philosophy that was created. Interesting. Remember that point. I'll be returning to it in a few minutes. Once Enlil muttered those infamous words, "Anything they scheme to do shall no longer be impossible for them," many other Anunnaki began to panic as well. Remember that the Tower of Babel incident took place after the Great Flood, so these gods realized that they needed humans for labor, but they also knew that the humans' growing numbers were a threat to them. How could they allow the population to continue to grow, but at the same time keep the people under their control? Well, religion has always been a great source of control, but that would come along later. For now, confusing their languages would have to suffice. But that wasn't the only problem that the Anunnaki were facing. Oh no. They had major developing conflicts within their own ranks. Remember the bitter rivalry between Enlil and Enki? I have referenced it on this program many times. Well, that friction only increased as each of these brothers produced offspring. Remember, in Anunnaki society, the males may have wives, but they are also allowed concubines and consorts. Many even had sex with human women as well. These Anunnaki, well, especially the males, are a horny lot to be sure. As their offspring grew in numbers, these young Anunnaki gods wanted land and kingdoms of their own, and fierce struggles for supremacy ensued. And those battles were not just against other families. The sons of Enlil and Enki couldn't even get along with their own brothers, not to mention their cousins. As time continued to pass, the Anunnaki all became more or less overlords of their territories, each fiercely guarding their own lands, industries, and interests over those of their neighboring Anunnaki. In some instances, so much so that these conflicts often resulted in war. The claims by ancient kings throughout history, as well as in various books of the Old Testament, stating that they went to war on the command of my God, should not be taken lightly. In fact, many historical documents throughout history make it clear that this was absolutely true. It was as though the Anunnaki were using the Earth as their very own personal copy of the board game Risk. And I contend that this has never stopped. You hear people talk all the time about shadow governments that are actually running our planet, and that our leaders must do as they are told by these secret elites that make all of the decisions behind the scenes. What if this is true? Are the Anunnaki still making all of the decisions here on planet Earth? Could this be why we never get total disclosure regarding UFOs or aliens? Because their control over us would be ruined if we actually ever discovered the truth. I find it interesting that Dr. Stephen Greer, founder of SETI, or the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and the Disclosure Project, made an interesting statement on his latest podcast. He said, quote, "So what he was saying was that we have figured this out, but folks who have, let's say, an overreaching desire to control the population through fear, through endless war, through control of the energy sector, this is key. They don't want the full truth out. They want part of the truth out, and they want the part that resounds to their benefit, that serves their agenda." End quote. Fascinating. It looks as if you'll have to continue to follow my show if you really want the truth, because you're never going to get it from the government. The Anunnaki, then as now, retain the powers of conducting foreign affairs. As the human population grew and spread to new villages, cities, states, and even countries, it became necessary to find ways to remind the masses who their particular God was. The Old Testament echoes this issue of forcing people to adhere to their God, the particular God that governed the region where they lived, and how important it was not to prostitute after other gods. The Anunnaki's solution was to create and establish many places of worship, each of them displaying the symbols and likenesses of the correct God for that location. The age of paganism had begun. I think it relevant at this point for me to mention that beginning with episode 10, I will begin teaching from the book The Wars of Gods and Men. I will not always discuss the books of Mr. Sitchin in the same order that he wrote them, and since we are concluding our studies of the 12th planet today by introducing these Wars of the Gods, I think I'm justified in continuing in that vein, because it is paramount for me to emphasize at this point just how important these wars were in shaping the lives that we live to this day, and how these conflicts reshaped the planet and led to, for one thing, the creation of Judaism, which in turn led to the creation of Christianity and Islam, which billions of people still worship to this day. Marduk's infamous moment in the Old Testament when he mutters the renowned words, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me," is the climax of these wars. So be sure to tune in for episode 10 as I begin discussing Zecharia Sitchin's book, The Wars of Gods and Men, and be sure to tell your friends and family about it. This is all so very important. Okay, so back to the text as we conclude both this episode and the book we have been discussing, the 12th planet. After the deluge, or Great Flood, the Anunnaki held many lengthy councils regarding the future coexistence of themselves and mankind here on Earth. As a result of these discussions, 4 regions were created. 3 of them have been already discussed: Mesopotamia, the Nile Valley, and the Indus Valley, and these were settled by mankind. But the 4th region was holy for the gods only and restricted from mankind. It was an area which could only be accessed with prior authorization. Trespassing on this land could result in a quick death by awesome weapons wielded by fierce guards. It was the land known as Till Moon, or the place of the missiles. It was the location of the new Anunnaki spaceport, since the old one at Nippur and Sippur had been wiped out by the floodwaters, and it was the area we now know as the Sinai Peninsula. And once again, command over it was given to Shamash, the god of the fiery rockets. Ancient tales and even recorded history are filled with stories of relentless efforts of men to reach this hallowed place on the chance that they may be able to somehow access a rocket and soar to the heavens, where they could live in eternal bliss with their gods. A quest that is unfortunately another hollow dream. For as I have shown on earlier episodes, the Anunnaki do not live forever. It may seem like it to an earthling who has a much shorter lifespan, but the Anunnaki grow old and die eventually too. Nonetheless, this yearning is a central belief to most of the religions of planet Earth. This belief that a righteous life on Earth will lead to an afterlife in the heavenly abode. And that is where I leave you for this episode. You have quite a lot to digest there, and we have so much more to cover and learn. I am Mad Mark, and I sincerely hope that you have enjoyed this episode. If so, please like, share, and comment. It helps so much. And also, tell your friends and help spread the word about this show. Also, if you have any questions regarding the content discussed on this program, just message me through madmarktv.com or on any of my social media platforms. I also wish to remind everyone that listening to this show is no excuse to not read the book that we are discussing here, The 12th Planet by Zecharia Sitchin. It is an amazing work, and I am leaving out much of the information in order to keep the show moving properly, so do yourselves a favor and read that book. On the next episode, we will begin studying another of Zecharia Sitchin's classic works, The Wars of Gods and Men. Who are the aliens? The history of the Anunnaki on planet Earth is written and produced by me, Mad Mark. Today we have taken another step in our ongoing journey to discover the truth. I promise you that things will get more and more interesting the further we delve into this topic of who are the aliens, the history of the Anunnaki on planet Earth. Bye for now. You've been listening to Who Are the Aliens? The History of the Anunnaki on Planet Earth with your host, Mad Mark. Join us again on our next program when Mad Mark will once again uncover the answers to the mysteries that puzzle mankind.